welcome everyone to today's event, which is the second event in our alumni panel series this trimester. Today's event is all about careers in the EU and showcases what the career possibilities are for graduates from College of Social Sciences and Law and Arts and Humanities. My name's Sarah Brown. I'm the Career and Skills Consultant for the College of Social Sciences and Law. I'm going to be facilitating today's conversation with my colleague Michelle Cohen, who is the consultant for the College of Arts and Humanities. We're really delighted to be joined by Tom Moylan and Eleanor Hayden, who are both in Brussels. They're going to talk us through their career journeys to date. They're going to be providing insights into their roles, some kind of tips, advice, all these kind of things, and what life is like in Brussels. So Tom is an advisor to the Director General for Communication for the European Commission. He's studied history and classics at UCD, and he also has a master's in international relations from DCU. Eleanor is the second secretary at the UK mission to the European Union. She studied politics and international relations and history at UCD, and she also has a master's in genocide studies from the University of Amsterdam. So you're both very welcome. We really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedules to join us today. And we're really looking forward to learning more from you, and I'm sure our students are looking forward and ready with lots of different questions. So throughout the conversation, there will be opportunities to ask questions, and also at the end we'll have a Q&A time. So please make sure that you ask any questions that you want to. This event is for you. It's we've designed it to be a kind of professional learning opportunity for you. So ask any questions that you want to. There's no such thing as a silly question. Just make the most of the Q&A box. So if you just type any questions that you have into that box, and Michelle is going to be managing all the different questions as they come in. So yeah, I suppose on that note, we'll begin. So maybe we'll start by thinking about, casting your minds back to your times at UCD. So maybe Tom, we'll go to you first. So I suppose two things really. I suppose first of all, why did you choose to study the course that you did at UCD? And did you have any kind of standout kind of moments or events or anything that shaped your career ideas whilst you were at UCD?
Sure. Thank you very much for having me to begin. Delighted to be here. So yeah, why did I choose the course? It was actually quite a personal decision, because when I wasn't necessarily the best student in school, and one of the things that one of the consequences of this was that I was sent to study with my grandmother after school every day to kind of buck me up a little bit, let's say. Mm-hmm. And her main subject was actually classics and history were her mm-hmm. focuses, and kind of as a result of that, it became one of my favorite subjects. And to be honest, I also didn't really have a notion, like when you're at that stage in life, it's very hard to have a solid idea of where you're going. So I was kind of overwhelmed by the whole thing, by the need to make a decision like that. And I decided that probably the best thing to do would be to do the thing that I was enjoying most, and to keep doing that, because it would at least see me through the next while. And then as soon as I got into it, especially with the classics, I had a whole world of kind of history and philosophy and stories and ideas coming at me, and it became something that's I really became passionate about and stuck with me to this day.
Yeah, and
then
Sorry, I was just going to say, and that's probably something that lots of the students listening right now can kind of, appreciate. They probably just chose what they were enjoying. So
that's it. Like, and I don't think that there's any better thing you can do unless you have, obviously some people have a vision. I was not blessed with some sort of overarching vision. So at the end of the day, I was just perfectly happy to continue doing what I loved and developing that. And that's kind of been, to be honest, the whole arc of my career in general has been doing what I love and continuing to pursue the things that I'm enjoying at a particular time until they reach a point of evolution. And then in terms of things that actually jumped out at me, they're your second question, things from my time in UCD that jumped out at me. One of the big formative things, I suppose, was I participated in UCD Volunteers overseas, and I went to Haiti with UCD VO. I also participated in the SUAS Educational Development Volunteer Program, and through both of those programs, I kind of became much more curious about the world at large, and and they were they were. I suspect that kind of was what laid sowed the seeds of something internationally oriented, even though I didn't really know at the time.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Okay, and the same question to you, Eleanor. So why did you choose the course that you studied at UCD? And then also, was there anything that shaped your ideas about your career whilst you were studying at UCD?
Thanks, Sarah, and I'm really happy to be here as well, everyone. Great to see that so many people have tuned in. So actually, a lot of what Tom said is very familiar to me as well, about my time in UCD and actually choosing to go there in the first place. So I actually grew up in Brussels and went to a really very kind of academic focused school. So by the time I was 18, I decided I'd had enough of academics and I was never going to write another essay again in my life. And I actually went off to art college for a year. After about 6 months in, I decided it really wasn't for me. I needed to do something else. And actually what attracted me to UCD was that you could do so many subjects in first year doing arts. And I had no idea at that point what I wanted to do at all. So it was great. I think I did 6 subjects in first year. So it was great to get that kind of just different variety of subjects. And that's sort of why I ended up doing arts. And then within first year, I've always been really interested in politics and current affairs, so that's sort of why I picked politics. And I actually was really bad at history in school, but just really got inspired by one of the professors at UCD. So that's why I ended up picking history. So yeah, that's kind of how I got to where I was. It's sort of, I think, a theme of my career, just sort of end up floating into different things, which is a bad thing. And the kind of highlight, I would say, and what made me kind of pick my master's and sort of, I think, sparked interest in like the international bit, was I did a course in second year, I think, about the international community and genocide, which really made me look at how the international fora work together and like how things go through the UN and how the European Union can kind of work to make the world a better place. So that's sort of how I got interested in working for kind of international organizations in that sort of way.
Very good. And did you get involved in any kind of voluntary activities or extracurricular activities that kind of shaped your thoughts as well?
So yeah, I did the same kind of SUAS initiative that Tom was talking about, and that was really great to sort of experience sort of different walks of life as well, I think, because growing up here in the kind of Euro bubble, as we call it, I was really exposed to sort of lots of international people, but all of the kind of similar socioeconomic status. So it was really interesting to then see and meet people from all sorts of backgrounds, which I think is something that the EU institutions can definitely be considering more of. So that was, yeah, that's definitely shaped a lot of my experiences as well.
Very good. And I suppose just thinking about your the kind of skills that you might have developed with those kind of extracurricular activities and through your studies, are there any kind of particular skills that you developed during your time at UCD that you feel have really stood well to you when you were getting your first role and just throughout your career more generally? I suppose I will go to Tom.
Sure. Well, I'm sure there are many that I probably don't know, but one that genuinely jumps out at me, which I think has been a kind of a theme in a slightly in across my career, has been the instinct to research and study broadly whenever I come into contact with any problem or anything I do in general. At different points, I directly after my degree, I became a teacher, as an English teacher for a while, and that was very much having a huge amount of resources in terms of stories and ideas and inspiration to draw on. Was something that constantly fed me, and I also think it inspired a kind of a curiosity about stories and people and cultures, which and I guess through both history and classics, studying cultures that are so different to yours and so distant, both in time and also just in many other ways. It inspired. It kind of drove a constant curiosity about things, I suppose.
Very good, thank you. And same question to you, Eleanor.
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of what Tom says, again, I identify strongly with. I think you get to meet such a wide, eclectic group of people in UCD, and there are so many things to try, all the different societies, and as you know, the volunteering opportunities and stuff, that it's just, you get to try out lots of different things and find out what you like and what you don't like. I think what was also great for me was it taught me that, you know, you can choose the wrong thing, I guess, you know, at the beginning, but you can pick yourself up and learn from those mistakes and change what you're doing. And like, I think UCD was a really flexible place for allowing people to do that as well, because I think you're so young picking what you're doing in college that actually, you know, it's really easy to make, you know, a choice that maybe turns out not to be the correct one in the first instance. So it was great that UCD gave you the kind of opportunity to try different things out. And I really liked the kind of elective modules you could do that, you know, are just outside of your core curriculum. So I thought that was really good. And I think, yes, that makes you aware of like the wider world and things outside your subject area. So I'd agree with that doing as much of that as possible at university is a really good thing.
Very good. And definitely think it's really true. Like whatever, like you were saying, like if you do something that you kind of think is completely off kilter from what you actually want to do, it's not necessarily a kind of bad experience, or like you said, a wrong experience. It's just trying to reflect on the skills and the kind of learning from it, and then taking that forward and kind of going off in a new direction. Okay, very good. So I think I'll ask you both about your kind of first kind of main roles within the EU next, and then we'll go and see if we've got any questions. So Eleanor, I know you were a Blue Book trainee with the European Commission. So would you be able to tell us a little bit about that, like what the experience was like, what that involved, and maybe how you secured the position as well?
Yeah, sure. So I remember applying for that because I was sort of coming towards the end of my master's degree, and I hadn't really had anything lined up afterwards. And my dad sort of mentioned it off the cuff to me that, you know, the EU does like internships, you should look at that. So I did, and I applied and then was successful in that application. So you have to do it through an online portal, and then they will select you, I think, based on like your grades, but also your experience. They, you know, I think it's open to people from all ages. So lots of people were much older than I was when I was doing it. Equally, there were people who were younger than me as well. Sort of different backgrounds. And they also do them in the Council and the European Parliament as well. So like there are lots of options, and they do them twice a year as well. So like there's a huge amount of options. And I think there's kind of 600 per session or something. So there's a lot of people.
Right. Wow.
Like, really is quite a lot of scope to do it, and you get placed in all different parts of the European Commission. So I was in the Secretariat General, which is kind of like, I don't know how to say the equivalent, but it's sort of like the central brain. It doesn't really own any of the policy that the commission does, but it sort of like does all the processy stuff. So I was kind of business continuity bit of that, so that and crisis management. So that's sort of like the bit of it that deals with how you would still go to work if there was a pandemic.
So very relevant
in hindsight. And I was also there at the time of the migration crisis, so there was a huge amount of kind of coordinating what all the different bits of the commission were doing and how they were reaching to member states and kind of keeping track of everything that was going on. So there are loads of different ways to get into it as well. I didn't do any lobbying, but I know that people do kind of reach out to whoever is in the area that they might be interested in. Like the commission's personnel website is public, so you can kind of reach out to people really, really easily. It'll have their phone number, their email address. So
and did you select those kind of roles that you went into, or how does it work? Do you apply and then you're matched up according to your skill set, or what's the kind of process there?
So I didn't apply for the specific role. I think that you sort of apply centrally and then they'll match you best as they can. And all the different units who are allocated an intern for that session are able to go in and review everyone's CV. And so they'll be able to pick themselves where you best fit as well. So it's and as I said, sort of like I didn't lobby, but lots of people do. So I think if you have particular interest in like development or budget or whatever, like you can pick out the different areas that you'd be interested in and kind of request and put there.
Perfect. Some good advice there. Thank you. And Tom, I suppose same question to you. So once you, so I think your first role within the European Commission was a social media officer.
Yeah, well, actually, I came in. Yes, that was the first few years I was there, and I came in, but I also came in as a stagiaire. So indeed, but I didn't kind of apply off the cuff. I applied relentlessly and violently over years and was rejected again and again and again and again.
How many applications are we talking about, just so we can get a flavour of determination?
It's okay, and I just to give a little context, it also wasn't like me just sitting there stubbornly applying only to the European Commission. This was just like a thing that I got in the habit of firing one off every once in a while, because they go out. There's 2 intakes a year, so I was kind of like, and I was looking for jobs in general. I was still a teacher at the time, but I was looking for a way out here. But 5, I think, is it. Okay. And even on the 5th, where I eventually got accepted, I was actually originally rejected. And I wrote to them and I said, if you're going to, because I had filled out the form the wrong way. But the thing that I found about the application process in my long and meandering experience of it is that, so they look for specific things when you're applying, especially in the first part. So it's kind of in several different parts, as Eleanor just mentioned. But in the first part, what they're looking for is kind of, in your application, you get points for different things. You get a point for every language you speak. You get a point for every degree you have. You get a point for every year of experience you have, of relevant experience. So the more, if you start to think about, if you look at the things that the Commission might want from you, or the Parliament or the Council or wherever you're going, and start looking at your CV in terms of kind of points that you're building up in different ways. I found that to be a really helpful thing that I learned through violent trial and error, and also that's the other thing about it, which has been my experience in out here in Brussels in general, is the one thing that has struck me about the place is that it's full of really, really, really high quality, like striving people with amazing CVs who speak 50 million languages and have 12 master's degrees and all of this stuff. So the competition is super high, which can be really disheartening if you're trying to apply for things, because you get rejected a lot. I got rejected a lot. Because I didn't speak 15 million languages, and I didn't have all of these different. I wasn't like stellar in my performance necessarily before, and so but that's something that I would say to anybody who is looking to apply. Is just to bear in mind that it's a lot, there's a lot of competition. Mm-hmm. Indeed, as Ellen had mentioned, it's actually just been up to 800 people are taken in every intake. But that starts from a batch of applications that generally ranges between 11,000 and 15,000. So it's a huge, there's a lot of competition. But if they let me in, they'll let anybody in. But
it just shows honestly, persistence pays off.
That's it. That's essentially what I'm getting at. Is you can be wrong as many times as you like. They only have to be wrong once. And you can learn from every time that you're applying, and you can kind of one of the things as well that I found wasn't even just that. This isn't even specifically for the commission, but applying for jobs in general, is following up rejections. You get so many rejections where nobody tells you anything, nobody replies to you. It can be really disheartening. But there's the odd person.
Did you get feedback then from your applications?
Not necessarily from the commission, but I was also applying for NGOs and different groups and think tanks and that sort of thing. And I I got. Intermittently, I would get golden pieces of advice from people who I had been rejected by, because I'd follow up and be like, look, thanks for getting back to me. If you have a moment, I'd love to hear a few thoughts. Often they'd just be like, no, you were fine. It's just everybody's great. But sometimes they tell you some things. And I had a guy who worked for Plan International who told me that I really needed to tone it down a little bit and stop talking so much in interviews. And because as you can see, I can talk and I'll talk and I'll talk, but I would do it in a nervous, high-pitched and super intense fashion. And honestly, having that conversation with him, he gave me some really concrete tips and things that I carry with me to today. So it's a rough place, but try and pick up bits and pieces as you go. It's and don't be too disheartened along the way.
Yeah, good advice. I think definitely getting feedback where you can from employers, from the Careers Network, from different people is really important. So I think maybe Michelle, I wonder if there's some questions that
there is.
Sure, there's plenty.
One very quick one, Eleanor, that you might be able to answer really simply is, did you go to an EEB school? So Alex is wondering.
I did, yeah. I went to the European School of Brussels.
Okay. Now, so maybe there's an alum.
Hello.
So I know there's some questions about the CV, and that's probably something we'll come back to in the application process. But somebody, Tom, has a question for you, and it's kind of in relation to the communications, the political communication space, and how it's kind of changing, how it's changed over the course of your career. So Mark is I'll just condense this. He just mentions that he feels that the political communication space is undergoing a huge shift from kind of relationship management with the press and things like that, to actually being able to kind of manage an image. It's quite personally to allow people to react. Mark, if you want to raise your hand, and I can give you the mic if you want to explain it a little better. But in the meantime, Tom, would you have a sense of a kind of change in the political communication space?
I think I know what he's getting at, which is kind of along the lines of how digital and social media have transformed the political communication space, which is true. They've changed them significantly in many ways, and indeed, one of the ways that has changed them is the environment, especially for politicians, has become a lot more personal, and there's a lot fundamentally, at the end of the day, one of the big things that's happened is there's been there's now kind of unmediated access between the people making the decisions and the people affected by the decisions, and that has changed the game massively. That said, at the same time, it's also important to realize that a lot of the objectives of haven't changed. So it's important to realize what has changed and what hasn't changed. A lot of the time you're still trying to get out, you're still trying to do the same stuff that you're doing with press, that you're doing with events, that you're doing with all sorts of different, with all of your communications tools, which is get your message out, mobilize your base, connect, influence particular thought leaders in different areas. But then the information, so you still have the same objectives, but the information environment has changed, which is much more, you've moved from kind of hitting print deadlines, hitting TV deadlines, to having a constant 24-hour cycle of content creation. Mm-hmm. And as we have seen in particular cases, ignoring this 24-hour cycle of content creation can have disastrous consequences. So in short, I'm giving a kind of a cop-out answer, which is it's changed and it hasn't. But what's important, but but what I will say is that if there's one of the reasons that I started off as a social media officer, and one of the reasons that I managed to hold on to a job and also kind of become respected for my views at a relatively young age, in institutional communication, is because there's no old people occupying the lofty positions of social media oversight. So it became a really, it was actually something like I could never know more about press than someone who's been doing press for 30 years, but I can know more about social media because they have never connected with that, because I sit down and I think about it all day. I'm also a bit of a nerd about it, so I go off and I read research about it, and I think and I write about it, and so I think this is it's a good area that if you're kind of young and energetic and interested in it, because if you're not interested in it, it won't work. But if you're interested in it, it's a great way to and it's an area where youth is not necessarily a disadvantage. Your youth, in fact, denotes more experience instead of less.
Brilliant. Mark, I hope that answered your question. It's probably such a big question that we could have a whole webinar on it. So Eleanor, there's a question for you just in relation to the Blue Book traineeship. Did you have work experience that stood out, or was it the work your voluntary work that you think helped you stand out? So I know you had volunteer experience, but did you have other work experience as well? That's from Kirsten.
Yeah, to be perfectly honest, no. So I don't know why they picked me. I speak a couple of languages and I have a couple of degrees, so I guess maybe those gave me the points I guess Tom was referring to. But no, I had worked in the past at the Constitutional Convention, which was set up in 2013 in Ireland, and then I'd also worked in like Disneyland Paris and in bars and stuff, but nothing that was particularly relevant, to be perfectly honest.
Okay.
I think Perfect. It was probably more my background and that I have like worked in different countries that was more of the appeal, I would guess, than like my actual work experience. So I wouldn't let that put you off either, that you have specific work experience. And
sorry, there's a few questions coming in, and then I'll hand back to Sarah, and then we can come back to more questions. There's a few people asking just about the master space. So like, what about applying just with a bachelor's, or in your experience and the network you're in, is a master's something that's really important, valued, essential, would you guys say?
So I think people tend to put it down as a requirement on lots of job applications, but I think they're sort of trying to move away from that a little bit, because like for the job that I first did at the UK representation to the EU, for example, it was just a PA job. And I think they said like you have to have a master's on the application, but that was just to like filter out people. I didn't need a master's to do that job. And I think, and I don't know if Tom would agree with this, but like I did my master's because I was interested in that topic and I wanted to know more about it. I wouldn't necessarily say that doing a master's just for the sake of one is worth it. I think if you can get relevant experience, that would probably stand you in better stead as well. Like, people just sort of, it's like a tick box rather than a kind of, no one has ever asked me what I got in my master's degree or ever actually asked me about the content of it. So I would say experience is probably a better use of your time if you're not really interested in a specific topic.
Good advice.
Very good.
Yeah, I would agree with Eleanor on to a certain extent. I would say that there is a big kind of, a lot of people have master's degrees out here, and it's kind of, but indeed, I would also say it's a bad idea just to do one for the sake of doing one. The approach when I did it, I went off, I worked for a few years, and I started getting a bit of experience. I also started learning about what I liked and what I didn't like and what I might be into. And there's nothing like working in a job that you don't want for a while to crystallize what you actually want to do. So there was also a degree of that. And I think that, but I think that it is one of these things that you don't actually necessarily need a master's degree to do the job, but when like I said before, when hundreds of people are applying for jobs, when the competition is so high, it's the same. It's the same thing about always wearing a suit or fancy clothes to an interview. Is remove options to say no. It's like kind of bulking yourself up, kind of. But indeed, I think that when selecting a master's, jumping into a master's for the sake of this or for the sake of this vision, I don't know. I think I think you can go out and get work experience, and then maybe you use that to guide you in your selection. Could be an approach. I don't know. Yeah. But okay. I'll just ramble on. I won't. I'll stop.
That's okay. There's actually just very quick. This might be a very short one before I just jump back to Sarah. Just someone's asking about languages. Like they've heard. So Sarah's mentioned here. Like, do you think you have to speak French? She heard that it's really crucial that you speak French. And then people are just asking about like language in general. Like, what's the assessment? Is a leaving cert? Like, if I got an A in Spanish and leaving cert, like, is that great, or do we need something else to qualify? Anyone want to say? Eleanor, would you have any sense of that?
So I think it depends, and obviously Tom, actually working in the commission right now, will be able to answer a little bit more about that. My sense is, having observed it for however long, it was a very francophile place and now is much less. I think because of the kind of expansion in 2004 with all the Eastern European countries, it's become much more like English is the working language in the EU now. Obviously Ireland will still be in the EU and Malta also speak English, but like with the UK leaving as well, I think France will probably quite like to move back to using French a little bit more. So it's not essential, but it's definitely utilized quite a lot. And I think even actually Brussels as a place used to be much more French than it is now. I barely speak, I mean, I work for the UK government technically, so like I barely have to speak French going outside or anything, to bars, to shops. But I think having languages is definitely useful, and I think having French is probably still a very high, something you would definitely need to work in the institutions. But I don't know, Tom, if you...
No, I think you're correct in that, and indeed that's there is the rumblings that the French will reclaim the lingua franca. Not today, Macron. But I honestly though I don't see it actually swinging back from English. In fact, I think English, native English speakers, because native English is the lingua franca here, because it's the spoken language in general around the city as well, native English speakers are in huge demand. However, French, depending on where you are in the institutions as well, because it's from section to section, some are more francophone, some are more anglophile or anglophone. I myself, I didn't speak French coming in. I spoke Spanish, and that was enough to get me through the door, because you do need a second language. Now my Spanish remained untested, but no, but it is actually important to kind of. It's also a matter of. It's also something to do with. It is important to have a language coming in. There's. It's that depending on where you end up, it can be more or less important. I do know an unfortunate young fella who applied for a stage at one point and put down Irish as his second language, speaking really abysmal Irish, to be honest. And the poor guy ended up being placed in the council library sorting the books as Gaeilge. So I'd also be a little bit careful about the assertions that you can make, even if they seem very safe. But
you just never know.
Yeah. So,
very good.
And I might just actually ask a quick question about languages as well. So I don't know if this is true or not, but is it like an expectation that you learn other languages to help you progress within your career, or does it really just kind of depend, I suppose, on what it is that you're doing and the institute that you're in? I suppose that's something that I'd heard, that it can help you with your career progression once you're working within the EU.
Yeah, absolutely, it can indeed. In fact, so if you become an official, there's the test, there's a civil service exam to become an EU official, and when you become an official, in fact, your promotions depend on how many languages you speak, and if you learn additional languages, you can get promoted faster. And there's an element of that, but there's also a cultural element. Where, like, since moving here, I also should preface all of this by saying I'm not a natural language learner. I'm very good at English, and I wish that was enough. But I have kind of forced it and eked it out over years. And I learned French and part of the reason I learned French is for work. Part of it's to integrate a bit better in the life here, but also there's an element of kind of cultural respect to learn because we're supposed to be here, because there is like an ideological aspect of being in this European Union. It's not just words. People come here and they believe in it. You got to bear in mind people move from all over Europe, and they are all learning different languages too. A lot of us operate in English, but the vast majority of people are speaking it as a second language. So there's also a degree of kind of being European with everybody else by learning it.
Yeah.
So that's a factor.
Very good. Okay, maybe I'll ask you a little bit about your current roles, because I'm sure people are excited to hear more about what you do on a day-to-day basis. So maybe Eleanor, first of all, I'll try and ask you about your role. So could you tell us what's involved in your role? I'm sure there's no typical week. I'm sure it's very varied, and it's very I'm sure it's no day is the same, but could you give us a kind of flavor maybe of some of the kind of tasks and things that you get involved with, and then maybe kind of as a second part, like the kind of aspects of your role that you enjoy the most and what it is that you find most challenging?
Yeah, sure. So as you kind of introduced, I'm a second secretary at the UK mission to the European Union. So that sort of isn't anything to do with actually being a secretary. It's a level of grade that we refer to in kind of diplomatic circles. So I work in the coordination and strategy team, and we kind of, as the sort of team says on the tin, we do a bit of strategy and a bit of coordination. So none of us in my team sort of own a particular policy area or aspect of the like UK-EU negotiations, but we kind of help to coordinate it across the mission, and sort of help to give the kind of overview and sort of strategy and set a bit of direction for people. So I specifically work on the kind of operationalization of the negotiations when they're in Brussels. So when David Frost, the UK's chief negotiator, comes to Brussels with his like 60-man strong team or whatever, I have to make sure that they all, we know kind of how to accommodate them within the building. I mean, that's been even more difficult with the kind of coronavirus pandemic. But yeah, sort of like making sure we're applying all the rules, making sure everyone has enough to eat, making sure everyone has somewhere to sleep, setting up the sort of transport links and all that kind of thing, and setting up the negotiation sessions with the Commission as well, and agreeing the agenda for what we're going to discuss that day, making sure you know, Mr. Barnier and David Frost have time to meet and all that kind of stuff. And I also work on the Withdrawal Agreement Joint Committee, which is the body that was set up by the withdrawal agreement, and it's to kind of sort out any issues with the implementation of the withdrawal agreement. So that's kind of a ministerial forum, and I work on the policy for that. And then I also own the coordination of kind of getting ready for the end of the transition period as well. And coordinating all of that. So it's sort of quite a varied and I would say like stretched role for one person. But it's really enjoyable because it's so varied. And I kind of get to have like a finger in lots of different pies and see what's going on sort of across the mission, which I find really interesting. And not getting into like too much of the detail of the policies, but sort of seeing the kind of like politics of it, which I really like. I really enjoy the kind of how close I am to like seeing how the politics works and how that all happens behind the scenes. And I think it's really cool that like, you know, stuff that I'm working on is then like on Twitter 5 minutes later on the news. So that's like parts of my job that I really, really enjoy. I think the challenging part is probably more to do with the kind of context that the UK and the EU, by virtue of being involved with the UK, is sort of operating in that, like, it's so uncertain, and we just don't know kind of what's going to happen. I presume there have been developments like while we've even been on this chat. So I'll have lots of emails to come back to you after this. But yeah, so I find that quite challenging, that you sort of wake up and you never know actually what's happening that day or what you're going to be doing tomorrow, because what happens today will affect what's happening tomorrow. So, but that's equally kind of part of the joy, because it's so varied and it's sort of constantly changing, which I really like. And I think that another challenging thing is that obviously the UK is kind of becoming persona non grata a little bit. So those kind of relationships that we previously would have had with other member states or people in the Commission can be a bit difficult. So navigating those in the kind of changing context is really difficult as well. But yeah, I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, no, I think that was really, that gave a really good insight. And it sounds like you're really having to juggle a lot, and you're having to be very good at managing ambiguity and complex matters. So that sounds very interesting role. Same question, Tom, to you. So could you tell us a little bit about what you're involved in, what your work involves, and the kind of bits that you love the most and the bits that you find really challenging?
Yeah, for sure. So now it's hard. It's a little hard sometimes to tell you what it's like normally, because I started this job on day one of lockdown here. So I don't really feel like I've got a sense of what it should normally look like, because so far it's mostly been wearing pajamas and sitting in my living room. But in general, it's so that my work has 3 areas on paper. I think a little like Eleanor, I can kind of end up all over the place. But the 3 broad areas I work in are strategy, research, and then a kind of more hands-on communications aspect. So the hands-on communications aspect is something I really like. I used to be a speechwriter, and that was one of the reasons I got this job, is because they wanted somebody who could help manage the relationship of our office, the Director General's office, and the outside world, like how we feed our knowledge and communicate and have conversations with universities, for example, or with networks, with think tanks, with the outside world, because we're specialists in EU level communications, so we should be out and having conversations about how we do that, feeding into kind of broader knowledge. Then the research end of things is I cover so one of the things I do is, especially in and around digital media, I follow the latest developments. I follow the latest research in academia, in think tanks, what's coming up there. I summarize it and bring it back to the boss and put it in her brain so that she can kind of make decisions using it. And another part of that is I spent a lot of time looking at data, at polling, at social media data, at media uptake, that kind of thing. And I read all of these reports from all of these different places, and I write reports on the reports, and I make recommendations based on them. And then that's feeds into the strategy end of the work as well, which is I look at what we're trying to achieve in the big picture, and I tell people if we're doing it right and what we should be doing differently if we want to, or are we doing the right thing altogether? So a lot of big, vague questions, which is really fun because I like big, vague questions. But at the same time, sometimes they can be too big and too vague, and But like I said, I like it a lot. I think that one of the things perhaps that I don't like so much is that depending on the day or depending on the time, the work level can spike, and it's kind of just a fact of the job that sometimes you just have to work super duper late, and that's fine, and that will continue to be fine until perhaps I reach another phase of my life where I either lose my appetite for it, or other people have decided other people require my attention. But it's so that is a kind of a consideration.
Yeah.
But I'd say that I just thought I'd do these kind of like the crazy hard worky spiky late night stuff when I was young, and when I still had freedom to be going out and doing that kind of thing. I don't know, when it had fewer consequences for other people as well.
So I suppose maybe that leads kind of interestingly, like thinking about like work-life balance and, you know, changes, you know, that you might kind of want to factor into your work life, you know, as things may change. What kind of career progression is there? And, you know, have you noticed any, I guess, differences with different roles and kind of different ages that might attract different people? I know that's a really wide, big question that was very rambly. So I'll direct it to you, Tom, first of all. So have you got, obviously you've just stepped into this role at the start of lockdown, but maybe it might be interesting just to hear kind of what the kind of potential is, not your particular goals necessarily, but where you might be able to progress within your career.
Yeah, I don't know. But like, as a man who sits around and thinks about big, vague questions, I like universities. And but I was thinking about this before, in fact, that I don't, like I said in the beginning, a lot of my career has been following the things that I like and doing the things I like. And a lot of the time I have taken up little side projects here and there that have actually ballooned and then suddenly become much bigger things. When I was a stagiaire, I started doing social media for our DG, our section on the side. Or started helping out with the social media, and then I started learning about it more, and then I was like, oh, this is interesting, and then someone offered me a job in it, and then I moved over and I started working on that. And then when I was working there, I became more interested in the idea of kind of political communications and communication strategy. And then and also actually one of the aspects that I loved about social media was the writing, and I got really into the writing end of it. And I wrote more and more and more and more. And then someone hired me as a speechwriter because I was writing so much, and I had like accidentally created myself a little portfolio of writing. And then I was speech writing, and then I was more into the strategy stuff, and I would write strategy recommendations and that sort of thing. And then suddenly it goes like that. And currently my little gig on the side is I've started teaching a couple of modules in a couple of universities out here. very much kind of little small things that are about 10 hours a semester. But it for me, I love it because I do it because I like it, not because I have an ambition at the end of it, but because I like structuring my thoughts. I like sharing those things. I like having conversations about these things. And so then as a result of that, but I have a suspicion, I don't know, but I have a suspicion that previously, like the little things I was doing on the side that ballooned, perhaps this might balloon, but I don't entirely know. We'll see.
Well, it's good to have that kind of openness just to kind of see where things go, isn't it? And I suppose, Eleanor, same question to you, like within the kind of structure within, the EU, like, so you're a second secretary at the minute. What would the kind of, what could the progression pathways be for you?
Yeah, so I would just echo a lot of what Tom said, in that a lot of where I've ended up and what I've ended up doing has been because I've been trying new things or open to trying new things. So people give you an opportunity and then you take that and then they become interested in you and then bring you over here. And so definitely would just echo that, like, don't, kind of close yourself off to opportunities, and you never know what's kind of around the corner. I think there's like a lot of focus when you're younger on like, well, what's your career plan, or, where do you see yourself in 5 years or whatever. And I think like less and less, there's sort of defined career paths for people. If you're interested in this kind of work, like if you're a nurse or whatever, then obviously there is a kind of career path set out for you. And I think in the past there maybe was a bit more, you would join the civil service and just work your way up, but now it seems a bit more flexible and people are kind of dropping in and out of stuff and jobs are less permanent and that kind of thing. So I think it's a really good tip to like stay open and flexible to things. So in terms of where I work specifically, I mean, there are ways into the so for my work, because of my employment status, so I'm not technically a civil servant. I'm like employed in Belgium. So actually I've now reached the level that I can ever attain at this employment status. But because of the network that I've built up in Brussels and in the UK government, like I have options about where I go next and how I get promoted. So I think there's definitely flexibility within the system. In the commission itself, there are lots of different ways in. So yeah, you can obviously do a stagiaire, you can become like a contract agent, and then obviously there's the kind of more traditional like application, and you go through sort of like various tests and assessment centers and that kind of thing, and then that there is a very kind of career path defined for you. But I think just all to say that like there are definitely opportunities out here and you can jump around, and I think the more varied your experience is actually like is quite valuable as well.
So that's a really useful tip for students, just to try out different things, get a range of experience and build up different skills, and you kind of don't know how that experience might stand to you, but as long as you're enjoying it along the way, that's a good kind of step to take. Michelle, I'm just thinking maybe we should go to some questions, because I can see there's a lot pinging in.
There's a few popping in, so I'll try and kind of condense these. So Michaela, Kirsten and Carla had kind of similar questions just around the Blue Book training. Is it likely you'll get offered a permanent role after that, or is it quite limited, like you might get offered a role after that? Oh, sorry, I think the question is more, are the Blue Book training, is there quite a number of opportunities, or is it very limited? Would you have any sense of that?
I go ahead and I just say I got through. I stuck around. A couple of my friends did too.
Okay.
Don't presume that, because the vast majority of people don't. And it wasn't because we were special, and it wasn't because of it. It was like genuinely lucky, right place, right time. They needed an extra person. I was moved from a traineeship to an interim contract where I was getting a new contract every week for a little while. And then eventually I moved on to a more permanent contract. But it was like it was somebody went on maternity leave. That's how I stuck around. So I would say not to depend on it, but I would say that once you're in the traineeship, or once you've had the experience of the traineeship, that experience in itself is incredibly valuable for getting other jobs, because there's a lot of organizations, think tanks, lobby organizations, MEPs, institutions, or different places who are looking for people who have operated within the institutions and understand how they work. Even other parts of the institutions might be looking for someone who just understand how the whole thing works. So once you understand how it works, once you understand what the environment is like inside, then that's a currency in itself. I wouldn't depend on it entirely. Well, no, you can, like, but I just say it's risky to depend on it entirely for a job afterwards, and you'd never be guaranteed that in any place. In fact, it would be unlikely in most places.
Okay. Just a quick question in relation to the actual application process. Kirsten is saying she heard there's a phone call interview where they test your language ability or EU knowledge. Is that true or an urban myth?
I think that varies.
Varies, yeah.
Per application and which DG you're applying for and which unit.
Okay.
I certainly didn't have a phone interview.
Yeah. Okay.
I just got called up and offered it myself. I think they were desperate. They were looking for a native English speaker, and they were like, "Please." So, but there are people who have, for example, if French is super vital for the job, maybe they'll call you up and ask you. In which case, if your French isn't good enough, it's probably a good thing you don't end up there, because that would be really stressful.
Yeah. Okay. Just, I suppose Eleanor here, someone is asking, like, what advice would you have for European students looking at Ireland as a country to study in now and in these uncertain times with COVID and Brexit? Any differences between studying in kind of Ireland and European country? Any kind of sense of that or anything you wanted to share?
Yeah, so I don't know or can't recall what the status will be for EU students studying in the UK going forward, but I think they'll have to pay international fees, which are pretty significant. I think I really enjoyed studying in Ireland. That was all I wanted to do. Like, I wanted to come back to Ireland. But I think if you're looking at doing something in the other member states, like, there are a huge amount of opportunities now. The Netherlands offer loads of undergraduate courses in English, and master's courses, I think, are basically exclusively in English, and they're really cheap. And you get to live in Amsterdam, where I did, or like somewhere else cool. So I would definitely encourage you to do that. You meet loads of interesting people from all over the world. And I have some, like, great memories and great friends from that. So I would definitely encourage you to do that.
Excellent. And guys, sorry, to all the attendees, I've just posted a link there to our evaluation forms, just for we kind of collect feedback on our events, just to kind of help shape them and kind of what other kind of areas you might be interested in as well. So if you have a second to fill that out, that'd be great. And then I'll just back up just in relation to, so as regards approaching, like, showing initiative and kind of contacting EU institutions and agencies about job opportunities, is that okay, or should you really go through EPSO? Is everything kind of directed through EPSO, or do you have people kind of doing speculative applications?
I think you have to go through the process.
Yeah.
In short, in the traineeship, you have to go through the process. So the traineeship itself will go through 2 phases. And when we're talking about lobbying and when we're talking about contacting people, you'll have to have already got through the first phase. So the first phase, and the reason for this is it needs to be egalitarian. You can't have buddies asking buddies to get their niece into a place in wherever. So it all needs to be transparent and above board and go through the process. But once you're through the initial phase, so there's the initial phase where 11,000, 15,000 people apply, and this is whittled down to, I think it's about 2,000 people, and they're put in a thing called a blue book, and then you can contact places and you shoot them a message and say, hey, look, if you're looking for a trainee, check out my CV. It's great. It's exactly what you want. I'm interested in what you're interested in. And that's kind of, but like Eleanor said, some people do it, some people don't. I did it extensively and got accepted nowhere, and was actually then got a call from somebody I didn't lobby at all. Eleanor got it and didn't lobby. So, but then I know other people who lobbied and got it.
Very good. So EPSO really is kind of the place to start, and that's it, rather than kind of spending time with speculative applications. So, and there's a lot of information on the EPSO website as well. So hopefully that will help. Mark had another question here, just about, he had heard, and we've heard this a little bit in the media, that kind of people with Irish in the EU institutions, that population is reaching retirement age, and that there's a gap. Have you heard that, or any sense of that? Is this creates an opportunity?
Yeah. Oh, that's not even just people with the Irish language, though it does certainly doubly count for people with the Irish language as translators. But it is a thing about Irish people in general. Irish people are hitting a kind of what they refer to it as a demographic wall. Is kind of all of the people who joined when Ireland joined in the 70s are now retiring, and suddenly we've gone from having our proportion of Irish officials, and this is talking about officials specifically, the people who've done and passed the exams, but we've gone from having our proportion of Irish officials to there's not enough. And that means that if you can get in and you can pass the exams, especially if you have Irish, because once you pass any, like, just as a thing, there's all of these different exams. You can do exams to come in as an economist, as a lawyer, as an Irish translator, as a whatever. Doesn't matter what exam you come in on, because then you're through the door. And once you're through the door, then you can go anywhere you want inside. And so then and Irish people, Ireland has a quota of people that they need inside the institutions, and that quota, we are not going to meet that quota shortly, or maybe we don't already. I can't remember, but so there is an opportunity there.
Very good stuff. Okay, I think that's the general themes covered in all the questions between languages, that application process, and kind of there's a few specific questions there. So thanks to Mark for that question, very relevant. So maybe I'll just pose a final question, just to kind of wrap up. I'm aware of the time. Would you have any, and this is to maybe Eleanor first of all, would you have any specific kind of hints or tips that you could share with the students for things that they could do now that might kind of put them in a good position to develop their career in the future in the EU?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, I think a lot of what we said kind of you can interpret as tips and guidance as well. I think what Tom said earlier is definitely true, that like the competition here is quite stiff, but that's actually, I think, part of the joy. You're surrounded by really motivated, highly intelligent, really interesting people, so it's actually a really interesting place to work. So if you're even remotely interested, I would definitely like throw your hat in the ring. And they're definitely looking for like native English speakers all over the place, because with the UK leaving, that's obviously a huge proportion of native English speakers leaving. So yeah, I think that's really important. And as I kind of said already, like, don't worry about planning out your career path. There's so many opportunities here within the institutions, but also, as Tom also mentioned, kind of like lobbyists and NGOs and think tanks, and there's just so much here. It's really rich. So yeah, there's just so many. I think probably like, something for everyone in the audience type of thing. I think just in terms of skills, I think like, being aware of what's going on in the world is really important. If you're looking specifically at a career in the EU, then looking at what the EU is doing and where it's going is important. They have just had a kind of like conference on the future of Europe, and the president of the commission made a speech a couple of weeks ago on like the State of the Union and stuff. So I think just watching those kind of political developments will be really important and valued as well out here. And I think the only other thing I would say as well is, if you are interested in the institutions, practicing your verbal reasoning and your numerical reasoning. Can't do enough of that. I really don't have numerical reasoning skills, and that's been a downfall for applying for lots of things in the institution. So definitely brush up on those, I would say. Perfect.
Very good, thank you. I'd have to say we have practiced numerical and verbal reasoning skill through our website, so feel free to utilize those. Tom, have you got any final nuggets that you want to share with our students?
Sure. I guess, no, I think Eleanor covered a lot of it there, to be honest. I'd say maybe one thing would be that it can be tempting to fix your eyes on one thing and decide, okay, I'm going to apply for the stage. Or I want to work in the EU. I want to do this. I want to work in human rights. I want to work in trade, and focus on one thing, and chase that specific thing relentlessly, while ignoring other options. What I'd say is that be open to lots of different things, and even if it doesn't seem to be taking you on the path to where you're going or where you want to go, it like, for example, I spent several years as an English language teacher traveling around, and that actually not only ended up being incredibly important for, it doesn't seem to like line up with working in the European institutions, but at the end of the day, I was able to say, look, I can give killer presentations, I can explain things really clearly to people, which is super important in communications. I work in international environments. I do all of these. I could list off all the things. So maybe look at the skills that you enjoy as opposed to the exact outcome that you want, and look at developing those and having demonstrable experience in those, I suppose. And also languages, learn languages, because not only is it a pleasure, but it's super important out here.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for sharing all of those insights, and for giving your time. I think it's been very valuable for our students. Obviously, there's been lots of questions, so I think that they're really engaged and interested in all the kind of tips that you've provided. I certainly found it really interesting to learn more about what you do, and to get some insights into life in Brussels. So yeah, thank you very much. I hope you don't have lots of emails to go back to when you log off from this call. But yeah, we really do appreciate your time, so thank you.